Hi everyone, this is Raina, and this video is for those people who have their natal moon in the seventh house. The seventh house is the house of relationships. This is a house that is ruled by Libra, and therefore Venus, because Venus is the ruler of Libra. Libra is a cardinal air sign, and although Taurus is also ruled by Venus, there is a difference, obviously, in those two signs. And Libra, to me, is the aesthetic type of individual, the person who has a great sense of understanding beauty, in a more rarefied way because of being an air sign, intellectual kind of a way. You think about the intellect is not part of the earth, even with the chakra system, it's one of the upper chakras. And, this can lead to Libra being a very gracious, graceful type of an influence over the individual with a moon here. So this is like you having your moon in Libra, okay? And as a result, it doesn't matter, like if your sun sign is Aries, the opposite sign of Libra, that is a perfect example of how astrology is very nuanced, because you may read books about the moon in Aries and how volatile it is and how the people may be self-centered emotionally, and yet, you go and get your chart done, and, or just plug in the information yourself online, and you see that your moon is in the seventh house, and you're kind of scratching your head and saying, okay, well, what does this mean? Well, it's a sub-influence, and it means that as a moon in Aries person, you're going to be a lot tamer. This will tame that moon in Aries. You will actually care about your significant other, because this is the house of committed love. The fifth house is the house of love in its early stages, or the fun love, if you will. You could say it's, the person's attitude towards love, I guess, and that would never change maybe. But in general, when I'm thinking about stages of a relationship, the fifth house is more of the first stage, and the seventh house is the commitment phase. And the commitment phase is not meant to be the phase of intoxication, or what is that word, infatuation. Infatuation is a form of emotional intoxication when you feel like you're on cloud nine because you're in love. Well, that phase does not last, even if you love somebody dearly. That, from what I understand, that is created in order to sustain relationships. Because if we didn't have that phase, maybe people would be more fickle. But they get into this intoxicated state, and that allows them to keep coming back for more, right? And so that's what the seventh house. Now, the seventh house represents partnerships of all kinds. So it's not just about romantic relationships. But that's what we typically think of when we think of the seventh house, and or at least I do. I don't know about you. But then the moon is the emotional nature. So there has to be a strong desire for relationships when the moon is in the seventh house. If the moon is your emotional nature. Now, I want to differentiate between the sun and the seventh house. I see people with the sun in the seventh house as people for whom relationships give them life. But I don't see it as a codependency, unless maybe the sun is afflicted. But, hard angles to the sun. But what I would say about somebody with the sun in the seventh house is that they tend to kind of feel proud of their partner, or they identify with their being part of a partnership in a very, like a part of their outer identity is kind of wrapped up in that. But it's not the same as the moon in Libra. I mean, in the seventh house. Well, I'm thinking about the moon in Libra, but the moon in the seventh house versus the sun in the seventh house. The moon in the seventh house, to me, is more emotional needs. And that can be when you have an emotional need versus like a goal, being goal oriented, which is to me more the sun, then it can be coming from a place of lack consciousness, a place of trauma in some severe cases, where the person was deprived of love. I mean, literally deprived of love. But, there's obviously a spectrum with that. But the point being that the person is looking to another person maybe to define them, to fill them up. And they might feel like they're not quite right emotionally unless they're in a relationship. And so this can easily lead to codependency, this attitude. And codependency, I mean, somebody on the outside looking at somebody who exhibits these traits might easily say that person is desperate. That person has to have a relationship at all costs because they don't love themselves. And that might be kind of harsh because while it may have a grain of truth, it's simply the case that these people, they just naturally are acclimated emotionally to relationships. And it will be most puzzling to those people who have their moon in Capricorn, in Virgo, in Aquarius. I'm trying to think of the colder signs, I'm not talking about, I'm talking about moon placements. I'm not talking about your overall nature is cold. But in that moon sign where you may read about your moon not being very romantic, not being, being kind of solitary at times, and being, with the moon in Capricorn, maybe being hard-boiled, with the Saturnian influence on your emotions is not going to lend itself to somebody being very dependent, to say the least. But this can certainly, if you have your moon in Capricorn and it's in the seventh house, that could certainly make you more vulnerable. I think that's a good way of putting it, because the emotions, are emotions themselves can reveal vulnerability. And so if your moon is in a water sign, I was going to say forget about it, you are in very deep, okay? And, I was just thinking about if you have your moon in Scorpio, oh my gosh. It's just a question of that sense of, I don't know, the word completion came into my mind for some reason. This is the house of partnership. So, some people, I remember in high school, there would always be, I remember there was this one couple, and I really kind of worshiped them because they were like together all the time. And they were like always making out in the hallways and stuff. And I don't think they ended up staying together. But sometimes that, that people meet in high school and they stay together. And that sense of like the soulmate, the sense of like, you just want to do everything with that other person. This may be the emotional desire of this partner. Now, here's the problem with that. It's not saying that it's not possible to achieve that in life. But you have to have a person willing to cooperate. And if you have emotional deficits from your past, if you were not nurtured growing up, if you felt unloved growing up, and you are emotionally, you're feeling empty, and you're looking for somebody to fill you up, that can actually, when it's taken to the extreme, be a form of like covert narcissism, not something that is malicious and not, not meant to hurt other people, but feeling so empty that you're looking for love and validation of being a lovable person through your primary relationship, and putting too much pressure on that other person. Other people are not here for us to validate us. Now, I feel that they can help us to reflect back our beautiful qualities, for sure, and that they can help us immensely in this regard. But there can't be this demand placed on other people, and this is where it gets hairy and tricky, okay? So the person with this placement, and this will be, I think there will be a greater likelihood of the person being like this if their moon is in Cancer, their moon is in Scorpio, in Pisces, but some might be more demanding than others of those signs, or smothering, I should say. And anyone can be like that if they have experienced trauma, growing up. That could make the person, like I said, very vulnerable and looking for somebody to take care of them. And that's something that is not, it's a human desire, but it can lead to pushing somebody away because it's too intense for them. So the reason I am going on and on about this is because if you recognize yourself in what I have said, I think that's enough for you to be able to kind of catch yourself the next time that you're dating. Let's say you're single right now and you're just looking for a relationship, and being able to say, you know what, I'm not going to try to move this relationship too fast, because that's the other piece in this. The moon is very unstable in general. And so the moon can lead to a sense of fluctuation in your feelings. And this, if your moon is in Gemini, you may be very fickle in love, more even so than you would normally be, because a moon in Gemini itself can be fickle and changeable, that changeability. So that idea of being in love with love and going from one relationship to the next. Now, as I stated, the fifth house is more of the early stages of love. So this may be like Elizabeth Taylor. I don't know what house her moon was in, but she got married, like 8 times? People looking for a person who is going to devote their life to them. They're really looking for that mate, not like a one-night stand like the fifth house. And just, but it's a very, I was thinking about this before I actually recorded this, that I wonder if in some cases this kind of emotional demands or dependency is really a denial or a projection of the moon in seventh house person's own instability and inconstancy when it comes to love, emotional inconstancy. So perhaps you're the one at the end of the day who has the commitment issues, but because you keep falling in love and wanting to move in with them or get married, you think that you're the faithful one, or the dependable one, I should say. And perhaps you're the one that falls out of love as easily as you get into it. But you've already, this can create chaos because this is the seventh house. So you may have gone through with the wedding or moved in with the person. And I think with, cohabitation, there is such a great myth, a great fallacy, that you're not going to get attached to a person the way you would when you're married. Yes, of course, there's more legal red tape hassles if you get legally married, and maybe more expense, but it still is, on the emotional level, you still get emotionally attached to somebody when you live together. So you can't use that as a way to deflect, because it's really the equivalent of marriage, and you have to take it seriously. And so it might be one of those situations where you move in with one person and you fall out of love, for whatever reason, and move in with somebody else, and you're looking for that. I would say too, I was thinking about this earlier too, if your moon sign is in like Taurus, where the moon is exalted in Taurus, and maybe you're scratching your head because you have this drama-filled love life, it could be because it's in the seventh house, if you have both of those together. So even though Taurus is a fixed sign, and you would assume, or Leo or Scorpio or Aquarius, that the person is going to, fall in love and stay with that person forever, in the seventh house, because it's the moon in the seventh, you may be much more likely to fluctuate. Your love is not as steady as it would be if you had, the moon in Taurus in the second house or something like that. But having it in the seventh house, and the fact that your moon sign also, that's going to definitely be what really creates the fluctuations. Not to say that if you're a moon in seventh house person, you can't have a lifelong marriage. That's not to say that at all. This is for people who are listening to this and find that they have had difficulty maintaining relationships. It could be because of that. Now, what can you do about something like that? Can you change? Yeah, you can change. The first thing is not to get involved too quickly. That can be another unfortunate situation. Again, the emotions can make a person rash, because as I have stated before, I don't know how many people agree with me, I don't feel that emotions are rational. I feel that they're very instinctual, so it's like a self-preservation. It's a reptilian brain, to me, that is trying to keep the person safe. And it's like that deeply ingrained conditioning from maybe multiple lifetimes. And that really influencing the person. I think too, I would say, especially if you're a woman, but it doesn't necessarily have to be this way, but let's say you're a woman and you have the moon in Cancer or Pisces or Libra in particular, maybe even like Taurus, but you may have seen your mother be overly concerned about keeping her man, and I'm saying man instead of husband, because she may not have been, she might have gone through like a revolving door with men, and then you're picking up the same habits, because the moon can be the mother. So depending on those signs, for instance, if your moon is in Pisces, you may have seen your mother get abused, or she was like the tragic figure. And because you're a woman and you were a girl, seeing her going through that, you identify with her. And then the history repeats itself. So again, these things are meant to kind of, provoke thought, but also to kind of like wake people up if they're experiencing that, if it's true for them. Simply knowing that you don't have to operate unconsciously can be enough to begin to shift those attitudes. And it starts with, nourishing yourself and not expecting other people to be the ones that are going to save you from yourself. Before I continue, I just want to give a shout out to Codex Astrology and Dark Pixie Astrology, because I did read, just skim through their information just to kind of get me going. And I don't include everything that they say, because some of it I don't necessarily resonate with, or I don't feel that it's really important to mention. But I just wanted to acknowledge that, these sites exist and they're a wealth of information. If you're somebody who, is fascinated by astrology and you live in the internet age, consider yourself very lucky, because back in the day, before, I sound like I'm 100 years old, but before the mid-90s, there were only a few people that I had ever seen who had home computers, and they were very crude, but they didn't, the internet, didn't exist as we know it today. And I think sometimes the first time I ever went on the internet was in 95, and then probably didn't go on for another 4 years or so, because it just wasn't commonplace. And we used to just read books, and I still have some of those books from the 80s. From the first time that a friend of my partner came and gave me a book, an astrology book, and asked me to do his chart. And that was in the 80s, when I was in my 20s. So the point being that thank you for those sites, that they exist. And one thing that Codex said that I think is funny, and I said Codex, Codex. I think some people might think I said Codex. But they're talking about, this is something that doesn't relate to love, and that's why I'm bringing it up, is that this could be somebody who is a co-owner of a restaurant. And I thought that was very interesting, because the seventh house can be partnerships, like business partnerships. So if you did own a restaurant, they're saying you would probably own it in conjunction with somebody else. And because the moon is connected to food through nurturing Cancer, or that is ruled by it, they say that if there's a conjunction between the moon and Venus in the seventh, I'll just read it directly. The native will dedicate a lot of effort in the appearance of the food, making it perfect for high-class gastronomical business. So in other words, a fancy gourmet restaurant. You know what I would say too? I'm surprised they didn't mention this. What about catering? Because the moon is, also about the home. The fourth house is also about the home. I'm saying the moon rules the fourth house, so those matters have to figure into what the moon represents. Kind of the person's personal space where they feel nurtured. And, catering, you're bringing it to that personal environment. So to me, that could be it as well. But again, in tandem with somebody else. Another thing they say is that if you have the moon in the seventh house and it's in conjunction with Mars, they say be careful that your partner might be violent and or rude, and that you have to soften their behavior. I don't really, I don't see it as being part of the conjunction. Just the nature of having Mars in the seventh might indicate a partner who is an Aries, an actual Aries, or maybe a Scorpio, but somebody who is rather aggressive or the two people clash. But that's a new one on me, but I thought that some of you might find that interesting. And another thing Astro Codex mentioned was that the native, I'm reading directly from the site, the native can receive positions that are connected with a public image and make him generally known. Of course, the moon can never guarantee a prolonged publicity by itself. It is rather drawn towards the opposite, unless there are slow-moving planets strengthening the placement of the moon by trines or sextiles. So the point is that I don't understand really why they say the public with the seventh house. The seventh house are other people, but it's usually like a one-on-one situation. So whatever. I just wanted to tell you about something that doesn't involve, partnerships, which I took up so long to talk about. But anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this, and I would love to read for you if you like this kind of thing. I'm really into this, but when I do these kinds of interpretations, I also include the year ahead and look at the themes for that year, and some of the important dates and things like that. So that would be like a natal chart interpretation, and I have other types of readings, including love readings, where I'm kind of comparing your chart with, compatibility with another person. And my website is rainandmoonastrology.com. The link to my online store is below this video. Thank you for listening. Take care. Bye.